Hey folks, here we are going on through the Gospel of Mark today, Mark 15, and it's called the Revolt of the Crowd. The Revolt of the Crowd. You know, in Mark 15, we have this moment that is right before the death of Christ, really. It's the moment when the crowd that praised him as he entered into Jerusalem will now turn and call for his death. And when we understand this, we ask the question, well, what is the driving force behind this change, behind this adjustment in their perspective? And I believe there are 5 things we need to see in this passage that I think can draw us and challenge us to strive not to have this occur in our lives. First is this. We recognize the people revolted and changed their position because they were driven by unmet expectations. Remember, when Jesus came into Jerusalem, they were yelling, Hosanna, 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 which is save us, save us, save us. And their expectation was that he had entered Jerusalem to overthrow Rome and to be their Messiah, their Savior from Rome. They did not understand that he had come to be their Savior for eternity. And so their expectations were unmet, and the unmet expectation drives us often to the place of hurt and anger and fear and a changing of perspective. I think the second thing we recognize is they felt under the influence of respected people. Remember, the people were influenced by the religious leaders of the day who were not following the Lord but were serving the self. Religious leaders had ties to Rome. They were concerned about their own authority, about their own position, about their own power. And they used that to change the framework and the mindset of the people so that they could lead the people astray, so they could change the perspective. So the people were in revolt because they listened to the wrong people they respected in the flesh. They were in revolt because they had expectations that were unmet, because it was not God's plan, but their plan. I think the third thing we recognize about this is that they rejected the one they rejoiced. Isn't it amazing how in just a few short days they go from praising Jesus to asking for his death? We recognize that they go from receiving him to rejecting him. Now, what we recognize is they're receiving him is they wanted to receive him on their terms. And when they received Jesus on their terms, they were easily ready to reject him because they did not authentically receive him. I think we recognize that that is a reality that can happen, that when people receive Jesus on their terms, receive Jesus and define him the way they want to, then it's easy for them to reject him because he is not meeting their quote-unquote needs or meeting their quote-unquote expectations, or they are listening to the wrong people that's giving them wrong advice about following Jesus. We recognize the fourth thing is simply this. The fourth thing is that they cried out of misunderstanding. You see, they did not have the biblical foundation to know the truth. They misunderstood what the prophecy about the Messiah was. They misunderstood the truth. And when you misunderstand the truth, you are set up to have a change of perspective about who God is. And when you have that misunderstanding, it is driven often by those unmet expectations, listening to the wrong voices. It is that concept of receiving in our own terms and setting ourselves up to reject. And then that leads us to this place that's driven by misunderstanding. I think the fifth thing we see in this passage that reminds us is the crowd responded out of the flesh. They were trying to identify everything but what they understood and they could grasp. As we think about our life, are we ever guilty of being like the crowd, where we receive Jesus but then turn our backs on him because we feel like he has not met our expectation, met our needs, that we've listened to the wrong voices, and that we're allowing the flesh to be the metric instead of the truth of who God is and his word? As we think about this, may we seek the Lord and say, Lord, help me to receive you authentically and to live according to who you are, allowing your truth to define my life.